what an afternoon it has been.
The rain has pounded the area all afternoon. The flash flood warning has now been extended to 8 o'clock, and tonight many people are suffering the effects of high water.
And the water has been rising.
Pretty much, but look like he's not going nowhere. It's just rising.
City of New Orleans 911, what's the address of the emergency?
We're about to take on water in our house, and I don't think the pumps are running.
He was calling for an ambulance, but the ambulance couldn't get through the waters.
A lot of flooding in Mid-City and Lakeview, nearly every neighborhood in New Orleans. Are the pumps working?
The water broke the water thing in our house. We need help.
This water is just here, and it's not going anywhere.
They got a pumping station on Broad Street. Why this not pumping?
So there are no reported problems with the pumping stations, no power interruptions to the pumping stations or to sewage and water board facilities.
These drains are not on. I mean, the water has not gone down any, and there's cars in the street.
People out here just, and again, wondering, are the pumps working? When is this water going to go down?
I'm really grateful I had a boat.
There's too much water coming, and it's over the car, and it's flooding our house, and we're in the house. We need help.
In the era of climate change, where we have these kind of rains every week.
Where the money going for the water, for the drainage, the sewer, what they doing uptown?
I'm understanding the water is not even going down on her street on Dupuy. It's like the pumps are doing nothing. So I need to know what is going on.
I mean, the city got to get it together. I mean, it wasn't a hurricane, it wasn't Katrina, it wasn't a major storm, it was 2 hours of rain.
So when the National Weather Service issued that flash flood warning, I don't think that people really understood what they were in for and what the risk was.
They found out pretty quick when the waters were rising in their homes and in their businesses.
And so, you know, we've spent the last, 2 months digging into everything related to New Orleans drainage system, trying to figure out what happened, what went wrong, and what can be done in the future to keep it from happening again.
And how the system even works. You know, people, I don't think, really understood how the system worked, and we wanted to take a look at that.
And alarms were sounded, heads rolled immediately after August 5th. What we found was years and even decades of neglect leading to this point.
Years and decades of decisions that have been made that, you know, may or may not have been the right ones.
And people wanted to know, one of the things I heard right away was, where is the money? That people knew that we had gotten millions and millions of dollars after Katrina to deal with this system, and they wanted to know what happened.
We've seen people frustrated over the decades. I mean, this isn't just a year, this is decades about flooding over and over again, and it begs the question, what really happened on August 5th? "1:10 p.m., rain starts falling in parts of the city. A drainage pump at Pump Station 7 in City Park kicks on, pushing water up the Orleans Avenue Canal and into the lake. 2:33 p.m., operators at Pump Station 2 in Mid-City fire up some of their drainage pumps, sending water up the Broad Street canals to Pump Station 3 in Gentilly. 5 minutes later, at 2:38 p.m., the first sign that Pump Station 3 is having problems powering its pumps. For nearly 2 hours, operators will try and fail to get the pumps up and running at Station 3. Meantime, water is still headed its way, and it starts backing up into the city. 3:01 p.m., a similar problem at Pump Station 7 in City Park. Its one working drainage pump virtually cuts off. Meantime, Pump Station 2 in Mid-City is continuing to send water its way and to Pump Station 3 in Gentilly, both of which are limping along trying to get the water out.
City of New Orleans 911, what's the address of the emergency? Oh, it's totally flooded, so like blocked. I mean, it's bad. I've never seen it get this high.
A minute later at 3:41, the power plant reports high suction, high water at Station 12 in Lakeview. They send power, but no one is there to turn on the pumps. At 3:48, problems with power equipment take out a pump at stations 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. 4:02 p.m., the National Weather Service issues a flash flood warning. And those two pumps at Pump Station 3 in Gentilly have problems powering up again, 2 hours after they first showed signs of trouble. So operators at Pump Station 3 turn on 2 other pumps, instead sending water up the London Avenue Canal and into the lake. Then at 4:44 p.m., the first sign worked to improve the drainage system is flooding the Desire neighborhood near the Peoples Avenue Canal.
City of New Orleans, what's the address of the emergency?
We live right here by like a canal, and you know the water be deep down.
The Corps of Engineers later admits they had removed sheet pilings that protect the neighborhood from the Peoples Avenue Canal.
This is Eyewitness News at 5.
And yes, we're here at Orleans and Galvez, where as you can see, we're inside the business here at Treme Restaurant. We can see there's a lot of standing water, maybe about knee-high.
5:28 p.m. Mayor Landrieu texts his chief of staff from Aspen, Colorado. Is all okay? Brooke Smith replies, lots of rain and street flooding at the moment. Am on call with EOC and communications. We'll update shortly. 6 p.m. The rain continues off and on in different parts of the city. But as this tape measure shows, the water rises, then sits in Gentilly.
It just, as of now, it doesn't look like it's going down. So yeah, getting anywhere in vehicle traffic right now, difficult, if not impossible.
The park across the street is a total lake coming into the yard. And
we're 2 blocks from a pumping station. So if we're 2 blocks from a pumping station and something like this is occurring, it raises much greater questions.
No, so there are no reported problems with the pumping stations, no power interruptions to the pumping stations or to sewage and water board facilities.
6:30 p.m. Cedric Grant calls in to WWL-TV's newscast.
We're now seeing what I believe to be the effects of climate change coming on us, where we have these continuing inundations that we all have to just adjust ourselves to how we deal with now.
7:34 p.m. Cedric Grant emails a staffer. At Central Control, every station is pumping. But at 7:50 p.m., Lakeview is flooded. Water has been sitting in people's homes and businesses for nearly 2 hours. A pump station operator finally arrives at Station 12 in Lakeview. When he asks Central Control to power up the pumps, they say no.
We are dealing with 8 to 10 inches of rain in 3 hours. It is not going to be able to pump that.
8:49 p.m. Pump Station 12 is finally turned on, only to lose power a half an hour later. It's the same problem that Pump Station 12 had with power on July 22nd.
As far as Saturday and the power problems, we had power problems since the 22nd.
Problems never addressed. Records show no work order was ever submitted to fix it.
The storage capacity of the system and the operational capacity of the system is, we're operating everything full out.
Lakeview and parts of Mid-City are still flooded. Mayor Landrieu's chief of staff texts him, we think you should take the 8:15 flight via Denver back to MSY tomorrow, planning an afternoon press avail. But Landrieu stays in Aspen. 9:48 a.m. Sunday, Landrieu texts his chief of staff from Aspen. How are we doing? Brooke Smith replies, we are doing well.
We don't have any information right now that suggests that anything was not working as planned.
Telling New Orleanians who are wet and underwater that because of climate change, this is the new normal for the city of New Orleans is completely unacceptable.
10:48 a.m. Sewage and Water Board employee texts Cedric Grant, how are you holding up? He replies, not well.
Those pumps were on the entire time. I appreciate that in some areas it didn't look like that, but they were on and they did work the entire time.
Joe, were there any pumps that were not in service before this rain event even started?
We do have a number of pumps that, because of the preventive maintenance work that we're doing all the time, we do have pumps that are out of service at any given rain event.
Meanwhile, across town.
And already have ordered an after-action report to determine whether or not there's any truth to the, kind of scuttlebutt going around that the pumps were not working as they were supposed to. I can just say with a lot of confidence that we have one of the best pumping systems in the world, but we will find out if there was a problem. Having said that, the city was going to flood anyway from this particular event.
A city council hearing was supposed to start about the floods at 1 p.m. 2 minutes prior, an email is sent out from the Sewage and Water Board saying Executive Director Cedric Grant will retire.
Early today, I notified the mayor of my retirement later this fall.
The pumps were on. The pumps were on. The pumps were on.
We have been told lies, and that is the truth.
Well, it's hard to know whether or not it was an intentional lie or a different way of communicating or a misunderstanding of what words mean.
Landrieu announces Sewage and Water Board Superintendent Joe Becker, Public Works Director Mark Jernigan, and Sewage and Water Board Communications Director Lisa Martin will step down.
If I can't rely on their word, I can't expect the people to, which is why we're going to start again. We're going to reorganize.
3:22 a.m. This emergency alert wakes up residents all over the city. The Sewage and Water Board reported power outage causing lower pumping capacity for East Bank of New Orleans.
We are right now running on our last backup power source.
The newest turbine at the Sewage and Water Board power plant fails. In the middle of hurricane season, Landrieu declares a state of emergency. 9 a.m., the Sewage and Water Board holds a special meeting about the fragile state of the city's drainage system. As for the public trust,
and the public trust is broken.
The public trust is broken. That's a pretty powerful statement.
Yeah, we found a real crisis of confidence in the city's ability to prevent flooding. I talked to a bunch of homeowners and businesses who openly talk about leaving
the city because they're concerned they're going to flood again.
Because they've flooded before, they've flooded again, and they know that if something isn't done, it's going to continue to happen.
I'm here as a representative of Zulu, but I'm also here as a representative of the community. This is unacceptable.
Naaman Stewart is the president of Zulu. Like so many others, he wanted his anger and frustration heard by city leaders. He spoke at a special city council meeting 3 days after the August 5th flood.
For the Broad Street Theater and all of the businesses along Broad Street, the Orleans Avenue corridor, to flood in the way that it did, there's no excuse for that.
I grew up in the city that cared for God. Now I'm in the city that just forgot to care.
The water came to my calf. Y'all should be held accountable too. These people could have died in the water.
We literally saved somebody in their basement.
You took the people back to Katrina. You know, drainage is a core government service.
I could not get home to my senior apartment.
I shouldn't have to make major life-changing decisions every time I see a cloud.
To say the pumps were on and working is an absolute falsehood.
The Zulu dance sits just blocks from this pumping station, one of the oldest and most critical in the city.
It's like living across the street from the fire station and your house burns down.
That's got to come out, and the flooring has to be redone. So everything has to be renovated, everything. But we had like 4 feet of water in here, 3-4 feet of water in this place. And it hurts us because we're a Mardi Gras organization. And this is the time when we prepare for Mardi Gras.
As Zulu historian Clarence Becknell oversees repairs to the main lounge, he knows the club is in a race against the clock to prepare for Mardi Gras. Members who stayed as the floodwaters rose worked frantically to save framed photos of the club's past presidents, but so much else was lost. The Broad Street Theater is even closer to this key pumping station, known as Drainage Pumping Station Number 2. It sits within eyesight, practically across the street. It seemed to do little to keep Brian Knighton's business from flooding and going dark for a week. How much of a setback is something like that?
It's pretty big. You know, this I'm going through my SBA disaster relief application process, and in an initial meeting I had, they said that just the economic impact, economic loss was close to $300,000.
At the time of the August flood, the four-screen theater was still recovering from the July 22nd inundation.
It was the opening weekend for the movie Girls Trip, and we had one of the actors buy out 2 shows of the movie. I know we have to do it ourselves.
That doesn't sound like a huge vote of confidence in the city tackling the problem.
No, and I don't know whose fault that is. If you can't keep the water out of the city, then you don't have a city.
As we walked up and down Broad Street, we found many people echoing Knighton's feelings. Just a few blocks away, at the exclusive barbershop, owner Kevin Banks replaced this sheetrock, but a newly painted mural was lost forever.
And I got him to paint this wall for me, and you see we lost that. We're going to come out of our pocket with about $7,000, $7,500, somewhere in there.
The cost to the community was even greater. For weeks, this barbershop was not able to serve its role as a neighborhood gathering spot.
Like I said, it was a mini disaster. It was a mini disaster, but it took our gathering place from us.
So why doesn't this work? We've seen this happen not just with hurricanes and tropical storms, but just everyday summer rainstorm.
It's pretty obvious that the system can't handle the amount of rainfall that we get here in New Orleans.
Right, and think about back in May of 1978, they actually used more power, ran more pumps than ever before, and it still flooded.
And then May 95, same thing.
Hurricane Katrina's always been the benchmark for flooding in this city, right? Only that was really an issue of storm surge. We're talking about internal drainage. And while Katrina was devastating for this city, it also presented a huge opportunity and a huge amount of money to fix the system.
Right, people think about the huge amount of money that we got to fix the protection system, but they also got over $1 billion to fix the internal drainage system.
If you want to understand the problems with the Sewerage and Water Board's century-old power plant, you need to talk to Osmond Caston. Oz, as he likes to be called, isn't an expert on turbines, but he does know a thing or two about keeping old machinery running in top condition.
It's a 1947 Ford. I've been had it maybe 30 years, and I kept up the maintenance on it, and it runs like a champ. I mean, you can start it up and go wherever you want to go. And you keep up the maintenance, you're good to go.
Yeah.
But just keep the maintenance up.
What happens if you don't?
They go to the graveyard, just like the rest of them. Comparison to the pumps and the generators at the Sewage and Water Board,
yeah,
this is, they didn't maintain it. If they'd have maintained it, it would start up and run just like this.
It has huge deferred maintenance issues that have been going on for the past 40 years, and we are doing the best we can to stabilize it and to fix it.
But wait, how can the system be cash poor when it got billions of dollars after Hurricane Katrina? The answer is most of that money went to the Corps of Engineers, not the Sewerage and Water Board. The Corps got $15 billion for hurricane protection projects, like these pumps at Lake Pontchartrain, or those underground box culverts that have snarled uptown traffic for years.
After tracking down the rest of the federal money, the part that went to the Sewerage and Water Board and not to the Corps of Engineers, we found a large portion of it still sitting in Washington, D.C., untouched, waiting to be spent. The feds gave New Orleans another $500 million after Katrina to spend on drainage, power, and pumps. A little over 1/3 has been spent, leaving about $300 million untouched. A lot of that is the $150 million FEMA gave to improve the Sewerage and Water Board's power plant. Only $50 million of that has been used, mostly to refurbish the existing outdated turbines in hopes of making them operational again. None of that helps Oz Caston. In addition to knowing about classic cars, he knows too much about flooding.
Well, the water came in the last time. We got up in here over the seats, and I mean, it got high here.
His classic car lot has flooded twice in the last few months, August 5th and again October 2nd.
I don't know where the money going.
Trapped on a carnival ride.
We're live at the Audubon Nature Center in New Orleans East, open for the first time since Hurricane Katrina. Plus, a preview of the great music at this year's Treme Gumbo Fest. And we'll head to the kitchen with Ted Brennan's on Decatur Thursday morning on WUPL.
At the heart of all of this is really decaying infrastructure.
We hear about water lines leaking all the time, but it really goes beyond that.
You're right. You could fix every catch basin in this city, and some still wouldn't drain because of that great invisible problem, the underground drain lines. Now, we found instances of catch basins fixed multiple times, but still don't drain because of pipes that go to nowhere.
When it comes to draining New Orleans, there are parts of the system you can see, from catch basins to canals to pump stations. Just as important are the parts you can't see, starting with more than 1,200 miles of underground drainage pipes that carry water from the catch basins into the rest of the system. Just ask the people who live in the 1500 block of Henry Clay.
I mean, you literally could not get across. I mean, it was inaccessible. And the water would stay there for literally days.
And then I know that some of the residents called the city made those 311 complaints? Tell me about that.
Dozens and dozens and dozens of times.
This map shows all the citizen complaints about catch basins just since 2012. The blue markers showing the closed complaints, red markers for the open ones. On this stretch of Henry Clay, you see 6 complaint tickets, 5 of them closed. But on this street, like so many others around the city, repaired does not always mean fixed.
The long-term fix was not in, and the catch basin would work until it got filled back up again, but there was no flow from the catch basin, so it was just second verse, same as the first.
The flooding continued because the old drain pipe below the surface was broken, unable to carry water to the larger drain lines that feed into the canals.
So it's almost a question of how many city officials does it take to drain one block of New Orleans?
Yeah, a lot. I am very skeptical.
Why are you skeptical?
Just past history of what we've had to go through just to get the first part done. I can't imagine going another 7 or 8 years.
How long has this been going on?
About 20 years.
20
They've
years?
never corrected it. About 20 years.
This catch basin on Colbert Street in Lakeview has been repaired multiple times, but still doesn't drain, even after a week without any rain. And when it does rain, the street becomes a lake.
When that August 5th rain, there was no place for the water to go.
Catch basin and underground pipes that clearly aren't draining. So how does that make you feel as a property owner?
I would move back to, if I wasn't 82 years old, I would move back to Jefferson Parish.
And as people here know, this is a citywide problem that can happen anytime without warning.
And we found that one of the major missed opportunities was a chance to upgrade the power system.
Right. I mean, they got the biggest chunk of the federal money was for fixing the power system. And people don't necessarily understand how all the turbines work. We took a look at that, and we took a look at the money and the missed opportunity to do the right kind of fix.
You have the oldest power generation plant in America. There is no one that's older. It's tired, it's old.
FEMA gave the Sewerage and Water Board $150 million to fix its Carrollton power plant, but in 5 years, they've only spent $50 million of it. Could they have spent the money more wisely than trying to fix old equipment? It certainly appears so.
The best option would be to go to energy and work something out and have it as the major source.
The substation for Entergy went from costing potentially $10 million to $100 million.
Well, what were you saying about the substation costing $100 million? That's not what the quote was from Entergy.
But when, again, as we get into what the possibilities are, if in fact we're going to do something more significant in terms of buying up power, then Entergy system has to be hardened as well. That gets you to $100 million. It could be more than that. If you have to build a new power plant, it's the equivalent of building, for the most part, a new Superdome.
We wanted to verify the mayor's claims, so we looked at Entergy. It wants to build a new power plant 4 times larger than the Sewerage and Water Boards, and it only costs $230 million. So it doesn't cost $1 billion, but how much is it? Well, the Corps of Engineers bought a brand new turbine for the Sewerage and Water Board, installed it, connected it, made it compatible with the old-fashioned pumps, even built it its own building. And that costs $31 million and produces 1/4 of the plant's power. That means the Sewerage and Water Board could have installed 3 of those new turbines, each with its own building and the ability to operate the old-fashioned pumps, for $93 million. And here's the real kicker. Even after spending $50 million on this power plant, they could stop everything right now, start all over with 3 new turbines, and still clear over $40 million.
Every single time it rains, the first question that people ask is, are the pumps on? Are the pumps working?
And these pumps were once state-of-the-art, envy of the world, built in the 1920s, but that's almost 100 years old.
Right, and what we found is that consultants go in and look and do an assessment of the pump stations, and every year there's like a dozen of them down or more.
But we never knew that, and the first time that we heard that admitted was after the August 5th floods from Joe Becker at that pump station when he responded to my questions about whether or not some of the pumps were down for maintenance.
They were on and they were operating at full capacity. You know that they are engineered to deal with 1 inch of water an hour.
It's pretty amazing in the sense that it can do 1 inch of rain the first hour and a half of inch of rain every hour after that.
I haven't seen any evidence of that, and I'm questioning everything now.
So how much rain can the pumps really handle? Just like the turbines, some of them are over 100 years old. Since Katrina, the Sewerage and Water Board has paid consulting firm Black & Veatch more than $1 million to give the board a report on operations. Every year, those Black & Veatch reports have said 10 to 15 out of 120 pumps are down for maintenance. For the first time, the public heard former Superintendent Joe Becker admit as much when I questioned him about it after the August 5th flooding.
It's very, very unusual for us to be able to use all 121 pumps on any given time.
So even if the pumping system could handle an inch of rain the first hour when all the pumps are working, they rarely are. We dug through the work orders for repairs and found thousands of the work orders at the pump stations were never closed, an indication they were never completed. Those repairs range from small things, like broken locks on the front door of the city's largest pump station, number 6. The locks were reported broken in March of 2015, and again 5 months later. But more significant are the repairs to the pumps themselves, some of which get backlogged.
Tell them where you work again, sir. Drainage pumping station number 7.
For the most part, we do our jobs on a daily basis. And to be put in a situation where we're not capable of doing our jobs the way it needs to be done is quite frustrating.
Station 7 could only run one of its 2 main pumps at full capacity on August 5th because of a shortage of power. Why didn't you turn the generator on?
So it would have made no sense to cut it on.
This $16 million generator can only power 1 pump here at Pump Station 7, and at the time, that 1 pump was already on and running at full capacity. Even the smallest of the pumps makes a difference. For example, the constant duty pumps at Pump Station 6 on the 17th Street Canal have been broken for more than 5 years. Those are the small pumps that constantly run to get rid of water from car washes, everyday runoff. Now, why does it make a difference if those constant duty pumps are working or not?
Because if they're not working, you can't pump that water down.
The canals have more water in them before a drop of rain falls. And when it does, canals fill up faster. This was the Palmetto Canal on August 5th. It feeds Pump Station 6. Has anyone ever measured the actual output of the pumps?
Well, Viola is in the process of actually doing that now. They were at my pumping station a couple weeks ago when it rained to actually go ahead and measure.
So no one really knows what the real pumping capacity is. But even if the drainage system was in tip-top shape, recent studies have predicted hundreds of miles of flooded streets if the city gets just 2.5 inches of rain in an hour. How often does that happen here? According to the experts, at least once every 2 years.
Crown Buick GMC has a great deal on the perfect SUV.
Cedric Grant's statements about climate change enraged many residents in New Orleans, especially those who, at the time of his comments, were still standing in several feet of floodwater on August 5th.
Telling New Orleanians who are wet and underwater that because of climate change, this is a new normal is completely unacceptable.
But Grant's comments on climate change didn't come out of nowhere.
And looking to the future, we must prepare for the unpredictable impact climate change will have on coastal communities like New Orleans. Because the storm stayed over the city 50 hours. We are all facing very serious challenges in extreme climate shifts.
We are appointing a new executive director, Mrs. Cedric Grant.
I am currently the city's point person on C40.
C40 is a Bloomberg-backed nonprofit pushing to stop climate change. It falls in that hazy area where advocacy meets lobbying. Bloomberg and Mitch Landrieu are cozy, and C40 is one of the groups tied to climate change that's been flying Cedric Grant around the world. Since 2010, Grant has taken 7 trips around the world, all paid for by climate change and green infrastructure groups. He's flown to the Netherlands, South Africa, Switzerland, Amsterdam, back to the Netherlands, and in January of this year, he flew to Dubai with C40. Grant's calendar shows dozens of webinars, meetings, and of course, the trips with C40. While Grant rose in stature among climate change-related groups, Landrieu pushed to do the same for himself and the city on the national stage. Records show the U.S. Conference of Mayors sent Landrieu and his wife to talks in Paris on climate change, and less than a month before the August 5th flood, this.
Mayor Mitch Landrieu unveiled his plans this morning to fight what he calls the existential threat of climate change.
They come up with a number of tactics in this book called Climate Action for a Resilient New Orleans.
With all of that in mind, it really comes as no surprise that Cedric Grant mentioned climate change in his comments after the August 5th flood. Here was Landrieu's response.
I don't agree with that statement. I think that was just kind of said in the spirit of the moment.
A deep dive into Cedric Grant's calendar reveals a man torn between 2 jobs. He bounced back and forth between his city office on Poydras and his Sewerage and Water Board office on St. Joseph, while at the same time, Grant was tasked with reforming and revamping the Sewerage and Water Board, an agency plagued with problems. He traveled to water and infrastructure conferences inside the U.S. regularly, and he went to Washington to talk to our elected officials, taking just a handful of vacation days along the way. That netted him a lump sum payout of more than $66,000 when he retired. That's in addition to his $175,000 a year pension.
So on August 5th, we saw all these people canoeing and kayaking around Lakeview, and then we find out that there wasn't even anybody operating Pump Station 12 in Lakeview.
Absolutely, and we saw that water just sit there for hours. The question was, why wasn't somebody there? Well, we know from scouring those logs that the operator had to come from uptown through flooded water to get there.
Well, really, that's just the tip of the iceberg. We found that there are 325 vacant positions at Sewerage and Water Board, some of these critical positions. We talked to almost a dozen current and former employees, and they describe an agency that's just deeply, deeply dysfunctional and has been like that for years. The Sewerage and Water Board operates more than $1 billion of complex machinery, but ask for a manual for any of this aging equipment, and you may be out of luck. But wait, let me get this straight. There's no training manual?
There's no training manual. Just get it any kind of way you can get it.
We heard the same thing over and over.
There was no manual on none of the equipment. It all was, you learn everything by hearsay.
Alvin Hayes worked at the Carrollton plant for more than 35 years. He thinks there's a reason workers are kept in the dark.
The less I know, the more money you make when you have to come out there and do something that I really don't know how to do and never was taught how to do it.
So you're saying that there was an intentional failure to train so that some supervisors could just rake in more overtime?
That is correct.
Employees and outside experts all say the human side of this utility is just as troubled as the aging infrastructure. Records show an agency that is understaffed, buried under a backlog of work orders, dangerously reliant on unevenly distributed overtime, but at the same time dragged down by high turnover and employee misconduct.
Management is not doing what they supposed to do.
Former Inspector General Ed Quatrevo used even stronger words.
First of all, there's a mass exodus of people leaving the water utility at this time.
Even the top brass at the Sewerage and Water Board acknowledges massive problems. Human Resources Director Sharon Judkins described a workforce fighting a daily battle just to stay operational.
Limited talent to meet the need. It's a lack of competitive salaries. Overall human resource system that we work on, it's outdated, it's antiquated, we know that. It's not customer friendly.
In an exclusive interview, Interim Director Paul Rainwater offered this alarming example.
You know, for example, there were employees at pump stations that didn't have email addresses. There's no doubt about it, there's no SOPs, no standard operating procedures. We've got really good people out, at every level of this organization, but they haven't been provided leadership.
Our own analysis of the agency's records shows the depth of the problems. Last month, the agency reported 325 job vacancies, more than 25% of its workforce. This has contributed to a backlog of more than 3,700 individual work orders to repair things that are broken.
And one thing I can say about the work order backlog is that it has increased by 11% since the first of the year, and since January of 2016, it's actually increased by 50%.
To keep from sliding even further, the utility has relied heavily on overtime. The agency was slammed for the practice in this 2015 Inspector General's report, which looked at 2013 budget numbers and found that dozens of employees were in violation of a civil service rule limiting workers to 416 hours of overtime per year. The Sewerage and Water Board acknowledged the findings, but instead of cutting back, convinced the Civil Service Commission to raise the overtime cap to 750 hours, with exceptions to go as high as 900 hours for, quote, critical public safety positions. But even at a limit of 900, and the agency vowing to do better, 74 employees exceeded 1,000 hours of overtime last year.
Overtime was used in fixing errors, and you can't move productivity when you're fixing errors. And so, and with that, the errors are caused by mistakes by employees.
Some of the workers we spoke to say mistakes happen when poorly trained employees make a bad situation worse. Frustrated by the inefficiency, this senior plant worker decided years back to take one small but useful step. He labeled the equipment in his area.
When I labor it, they would tell the guys, look, don't worry about him. Sometimes they would paint over it or stop me.
You know, they didn't have the adequate manpower, things that they needed to do as far as taking care of their part of these problems. They didn't do. They didn't maintain.
Longtime employees say the outdated work environment goes back decades. So what happened to all the improvements that were supposed to be ushered in with the Landrieu administration, with the selection of Cedric Grant as director? Here's one dramatic change we have been able to document. The year before Grant took over, the Sewerage and Water Board had an executive staff of 5 people earning nearly $700,000 in collective salary. Last year, under Grant, that staff doubled to 10 top executives, making more than $1.3 million.
Wide-eyed and full of wonder, these are the faces of the future of New Orleans. We work hard to give them a chance at their dreams and a decent life, where anyone who
every part of this system worked perfectly, we now know that it is no longer adequate to drain this city.
Given that, what's the solution? You know, so they're putting a lot of faith in one solution, which is called green infrastructure projects. They've gotten hundreds of millions of dollars from the federal government to work on those projects.
And the idea behind those, of course, is to hold the water instead of just trying to pump it out. Because if we've learned anything from all of this, it's that we can't pump our way out of this problem.
Being able to do drainage improvements, being able to do sidewalks and handicap ramps and traffic signals that improve how this whole neighborhood works.
But Grant wore another hat for the city, director of the Sewage and Water Board. Ousted from that position after rains flooded the city over the summer, Grant might have a different opinion of Costco today. This major retail development was allowed to proceed with hardly any green infrastructure. No permeable pavement, no rain receptacles, very little green space. All those features help soak up and store rainwater. Another administration official at that time, former CAO Andy Coplin, looks back and sees a major opportunity missed.
But
was anybody talking about this when they were building Costco and using non-impervious pavement over acres and acres?
I've said that myself, that one of my greatest regrets is that we didn't know enough about pervious pavement to add that to the cost of the city's incentive. The city gave an incentive to Costco, and for a few $100,000 more, I suspect we could have given a bigger incentive to them and required them to use pervious pavement.
Coplin should know. As the director of the Greater New Orleans Foundation, he proudly shows off the rain-absorbing permeable asphalt, cisterns, and rain gardens around his headquarters.
During the heavy rains earlier, that pavement looked exactly like it does right now. So there was no puddles. It drank all the water as quickly as it rained.
Experts praise the project, but see it as a proverbial drop in the bucket. To keep New Orleans from persistent flooding, they say green infrastructure is needed on a much larger scale.
The best thing to do is to catch the water in the landscape.
The motivation we've had is, unless we get onto the next city, unless we get into this water city, we may not have a city.
Wagner and other experts say New Orleans can no longer rely exclusively on the drain and pump method of handling stormwater.
Drainage system that was designed in the 1890s that we've been building and expanding, it's overburdened by these heavy rain events.
Worse, the massive and expensive system actually contributes to subsidence. When rain is not allowed to seep underground, the ground sinks, similar to a dried out sponge.
Well, the mindset that's been driving the city and that's driven the politicians has been pumping. Every drop of water that falls here, we have to pump out. That's stupid.
The water plan includes blueprints for rain gardens, bioswales, water parks, blueways, and other methods to safely retain rainwater. This new approach has been recognized by the city. In 2015, the city adopted a stormwater management requirement for new commercial property. Had it been approved a few years earlier, developments like Costco would have been required to absorb the first inch and a quarter of rainfall during storms.
We are at our limit, and so we have to have somewhere else for the water to go.
The federal government has tried to help, but projects in New Orleans have barely budged.
All of the things we're talking about is how the city can manage water flow and not just using power to pump it up.
An earlier down the drain investigation exposed that almost none of the HUD grant money awarded for green infrastructure, $140 million worth, has been spent, giving the city the dubious label of slow spender.
We have an urban water plan in the city, and I have not heard a mention of it.
Drainage causes subsidence, which actually lowers our whole city.
Instead of just talking about infrastructure, if you could also talk about green infrastructure, because I think that would help change the consciousness in New Orleans.
I think New Orleans believes it has more time than we may be given. You know, we don't have decades to get this together.
So what are the big takeaways here?
Well, we've seen a crisis in leadership, bad decisions, old infrastructure that they just can't seem to fix, and they've gotten a lot of money from the federal government, but that's going to dry up now.
The city is now having to pay the piper, and moving forward, there are going to have to be some really important big decisions made, because this is a critical issue for the citizens of New Orleans in terms of economic development and their livelihoods.
And we're also at a critical period where we're going to get a new mayor, and that can constitute a whole new board and probably whole leadership of the Sewage and Water Board.
So at the end of all of this, that means this investigation is far from over.
When the floodwaters receded August 5th,
they took with them the public's confidence in the system's ability to protect us.
Our investigation exposed a deeply troubled agency
whose interim manager admitted is in daily crisis mode.
This system has been a perpetual emergency for quite some time now. It operates on an emergency basis almost daily.
The mayor and experts agree that decades of neglect
have left the city with a diminished capacity to cope with nature.
They also agree time is not on our side, and city leaders have to make this a top priority.
If you can't keep the water out of the city, then you don't have a city.
And that's why we'll keep investigating.
To make sure that political promises and our city's future
don't slip down the drain.
Karen Swenson on Channel 4's Eyewitness.